We'll get started here. Welcome everyone to AI Literacy for the Future, Empowering Educators and Students. My name is Kara Kennedy, and I am happy to be sharing with you today. We've got a small group with us live online, so if it's up to you, we might just have more of a discussion at the end, or we can also do the brainstorming activity. Just let me know when we get there. Now, first, I'll just give you a little bit of introduction to myself. So I did all my degrees in English literature, and culminating in a PhD studying the representation of women in science fiction. So technology is something I'm really interested in, as well as gender equality and equity. I've done research on digital literacy in the arts and humanities, as well as Wikipedia. And I'm particularly concerned with the gender gap in technology spaces and confidence levels. And so I really would like to make tech a more welcoming space and something that everyone wants to embrace. And as part of that work, I deliver digital and AI skills training to help people upskill in this constantly changing world of tech that we're in. I'm also a self-taught web developer, and I really enjoy learning new software, and I like playing around with technology. And so I'm both excited and scared about the prospects of generative AI and what it means for society. And I think we're just sort of running headlong into that. And so I think I'd rather embrace it and try to work out how to do so in a responsible and ethical way. In terms of my educational background, so I've recently worked as a learning advisor at the university and polytechnic college level in New Zealand. And I know the challenges that students face in educational spaces, especially when they don't have good role models or they don't have perhaps a good experience in their earlier schooling with things like writing and reports. And they also face a lot of challenges with digital literacy and just the sheer amount of systems and applications that we ask them to pick up. And really doesn't matter whether they're young, middle-aged, or old. We throw a lot at them in the educational spaces, especially during and post-pandemic. And I see this continuing to be a problem when we now throw generative AI at them, and a lot of times expect them to just somehow magically pick up these skills. And it might be easy for some, but it's not necessarily easy and intuitive for everybody. And I think we need to always keep that in mind, even if some of us are early adopters. Not everybody is. Most people aren't, actually. Very definition. Okay, so my research and experience with digital literacy and the digital divide led me to then be interested in AI literacy and what does this mean? And I really hope to avoid some of the same mistakes that we've made around digital skills in the education space and get some more structure around what I think can be quite vague concepts. And so if you're following discussions online, in person about AI literacy, you might have heard this term being used a lot. It's been used a lot at this conference. And so people are saying, you need to know this about AI, you need to know that about AI. And I think it can be quite overwhelming trying to keep track of what exactly do we need to know, which tools, what skills. And so for me, I wanted to make something that puts some structure around that. And so that's why I created this AI literacy framework that I'll look at today. And I modeled it off of the UNESCO digital literacy framework because they already had this great resource. And I thought, how can I translate that into this new generative AI space to give some structure and to give a resource for educators like me to sort of get a handle on what both we and our students need to know. And so I think it's broad enough that it can be adapted in different contexts and different age groups. And so I'm hoping that you will have some feedback in this session. We can do some brainstorming about what are some ideas about how we can possibly apply this to your particular context or needs. So I know you can't read it. I'll zoom in a second to just give you an outline of the framework. So this is an infographic that I made using Canva software, which I really like. If you haven't tried Canva, I highly recommend it. So it has 7 components because that's what the UNESCO framework had. So I use that as my model. And so they're numbered here for referencing purposes, but it's not intended to be a linear process. That just was how the UNESCO one was set up. So I'll briefly go through each of these now. And then you can start thinking about how you might use this to educate either yourself or your students or people that you have around you about AI now, particularly generative AI. So it's not necessarily limited to generative AI. All right, so the first one is hardware and software, kind of the basics. So I think we need to know which AI tool and model to use and how to use different features on different devices. So for example, which chatbot is best for this situation, or which AI model or which AI version will be most effective for the task that I'm doing. And then also, how do I access AI features like speech to text or some kind of feature that would help enable me to do my task more efficiently or better. Second is information and data literacy. And these are quite broad terms, but how I'm defining it here is that you need to be able to use AI to access information and to organize your data, and also being able to evaluate the AI outputs. So what you're getting from your AI tool, evaluating it for accuracy, for usefulness, and then being able to modify or change your techniques to get even better outputs. So being able to not just stick with what you've done, but being able to modify as you go. Third is communication and collaboration. So we need to be able to converse with AI systems, often called chatbots. They might not always be called chatbots. Collaborate and share AI content with others. And then this gets us into the sticky situation about, do we acknowledge that we used AI? If we do, how do we acknowledge? And we're still kind of in the early days of some people are disclosing when they've written something with ChatGPT, for example, or created an image with an image generator. And a lot of people aren't disclosing. They're just seeing it as a new tool that you use, and you don't have to say that you used it or not. And that touches on a lot of ethical issues as well. And then collaborating with others when you're using tools together, or you're sharing, as we're doing at this conference, sharing a lot of resources between each other. How do we do that effectively? Fourth is content creation. This is a big one. So we need to be able to use AI to create and personalize new content, but also adapt existing content, which I think it's not quite as good as doing that part as it is doing the first part for now. But we also need to understand what are the legal and ethical issues around this. So AI models were trained on many data sets, including sites such as Wikipedia. And we know the internet and Wikipedia have biases already existing. And so those have then been pulled over into generative AI tools. We also know that they have trained these models on artists and writers' work, other creatives who, many of them, most of them, didn't give permission to have their content used in this way. And so you might have seen there's now lawsuits happening where the legal system is having to face this challenge of what does it mean to have machine generated output? So who owns AI created things? Who's responsible for them? And then if we think in terms of minorities and underrepresented communities, indigenous communities, they're also concerned about risks to their data and cultural, social, economic implications, because there are profits to be made. And so who's actually benefiting when these models are being trained and then sold for profit? So creating content is a lot easier now, but we're still dealing with a lot of ethical implications that are really complex. And we're still in early days for seeing how that plays out in legal systems around the world. The fifth one is safety. So we need to know the risks and the liabilities of using these AI tools, and what our own responsibilities are when we use them, and how we feel like we can use them in ethical ways. We need to be able to review privacy policies and know how our own data may be used to then further train these models, and whether we are okay with that or not, whether we are okay with that for our students. We also need to know that there's risks to using any technology, but especially AI software. We need to know about addiction to devices and social media and those kinds of things. It's a real issue. And the more interactive and human-like that AI becomes, we're looking at a greater need to protect our own health and well-being as we're interacting with these tools, in terms of things like asking it to act as your therapist, asking it for medical advice, asking it for legal advice, just all kinds of implications to think about in terms of safety. And safety can also mean using AI in ways that don't harm others or don't add to further harm to others, and checking the environmental impact. So AI is quite energy intensive at the moment. And so thinking about every time you hit that button to generate something, you're using real resources somewhere. You might not see them because they're distant in some other place, but they are taking energy and resources. 6 is problem solving. And this is kind of a broad category. We need to have common sense and use critical thinking to be able to cross-check information and analyze outputs. And this is harder to do if you're not an expert in the area, or you're a younger person and you don't have a lot of life or world experience. And we need to be able to use AI to create actionable insights and improve workflows. That's one of the major benefits that it offers, is being able to streamline and to use that information, but you have to know what you're doing to be able to use that effectively. And if we want to become better problem solvers and using AI, we also need to identify what knowledge gaps that we have. And so this is one of the challenges, and why we're all here is we want to keep learning. We want to keep upskilling as the AI technology evolves, but also as our needs change, as our careers change, as our students change. And so this means knowing at least the basics about things like machine learning, algorithms, and other AI concepts, because we want to have an informed usage of these tools. We want to be able to have informed decisions. We want to be able to ensure that our students can make informed decisions. And although you can use these tools without any knowledge or of what you're doing and what you're using, I think to become AI literate, you need some understanding of what's going on. Not complete technical knowledge, but enough knowledge to know some of the pitfalls and how they work, and being able to explain those to your students. And then the last one, this is possibly more thinking for people who've reached adulthood, but career competencies. So for those who have entered a job or a career or some kind of specialist field, we need to be able to use and customize AI tools in that field or in that industry, because it's not going to necessarily look the same across, all parts of society. And we need to be able to understand and analyze the content in that field. So having expertise in a certain area gives you an advantage, because then what the system should be saying, or have a better understanding. And so then being able to really take your specialist knowledge and harnessing that to use the AI tool is a way of combining your specialist expertise with the AI analysis, and then bringing out your knowledge and skills, and really being able to harness AI again in that safe and productive way, because you have a better understanding of what you're doing. And I think this is the one that will maybe take the longest to get to, where people might just be playing with the tools right now, but as we start moving forward, people really using it to improve workflows in their specific industry, and have specific use cases that make sense for them. Okay. Anyone have any questions or thoughts about the framework before I move on to an example? Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. So I'll go through an example just from my context. So here's an example of how I might apply the framework to my work with students at a high school or first year of university level education. It's tend to be the population I work the most with. Something like a basic research paper, which might be different lengths, but kind of the same basic concept, like go look up something, research it, write us an essay, or write us a report about it. So looking at my framework, so the first thing that I would do in terms of hardware and software would be, I first need to show the student how to access an AI tool. So something like Bing Chat, or also now called Copilot, they keep changing the names, but something like that, or how to make an account at ChatGPT, which we've learned about. You need to be careful when you're using tools with people under 18 in terms of the consents. So you might use something that's easier to get to, like Bing Chat. So while I'm showing them this, I then explain to them in simple terms how this is different from a search engine, which I think is really important. A lot of people are using Gen AI like search engines, and that's really not where it shines, and can run into the hallucination problems a lot easier that way. And then I'd show them some of the things to be careful of. So I might show them an example of, it making something up. And they might have heard that, oh, these AI tools are just used for cheating, so you shouldn't use them, right? So I'd have to then probably explain how it can be used as a tool, not for cheating, but for helping them, right? As another tool, like they would use Google, although of course different from Google. And then the second thing in terms of information and data literacy, so then here's where I might explain that the AI tool can sometimes get things wrong because it's guessing, right? It's really predicting things. It's not looking up information in a source like with a search engine. And that's probably the biggest distinction that I would want to make to people, and I do make to people, is trying to explain the difference between them, because it looks like it's looking stuff up, right? And explain to them that it's not an academic source. And so there you might need to, re-explain or explain for the first time what's an academic source, and why are those usually considered good to use. And here's where I would try a couple prompts with them together, and then see what kind of things we get from that, and then explain, okay, maybe we didn't really get what we wanted here. Here's how we could modify the prompt, or here's how we could keep asking it more questions to get a better response. So trying to build out that sense that you're engaging with it. You're not just, using some keywords, typing in like a search engine, and then you're kind of done, right? Which is, again, so a lot of people are starting with using it. And the third thing, so communication and collaboration, be further explaining, okay, how do you prompt? Maybe using a prompt framework, like giving it a persona, being more specific to be able to communicate with the chatbot. The more specific you get, the more specific your answers can be, more helpful your answers. Talk about keywords and context. There's parts of prompt frameworks that can be really useful to going beyond the generic answers. I'd show them how to take the material in the chat window and put it into documents or other places on their computer that they're actually working with. And here's where we'd review, do you need to disclose it to your lecturer or your teacher or your instructor that you use this tool? So looking up what's the instructor's guidance for the use of the tool, and do they need to reference it in some way? They need to put their prompts in an appendix? What is the guidance being given by the teacher? And these may change over time. So fourth, in content creation, so here's where I would show them how to use an AI image generator like Adobe Firefly, and if they want to add images to their report. And here's where there'd be an opportunity to explain how they train these models on human artists' work, right? That's why they look like real art. And sometimes the artists are paid and they're given permission, and sometimes they're not, and talking about some of those ethical issues. And is it okay to use an image generator that was trained on copywritten material like books or artwork, and maybe choosing to use something like Firefly that has a more ethical data set as compared to some of the other ones. Again, depending on the level of familiarity of your audience, the student, and how much information you think that they could, take in about these things. The fifth thing, in terms of privacy and safety, so I would discuss how to change the setting in ChatGPT to train on their data or to not train. How can you stay anonymous? Thinking about whatever you're putting in there maybe being used to train the model, and just thinking through a little bit of the ethical implications there, and the idea that every time you're pressing that button, it's taking energy. So, not kind of going overboard and just doing all kinds of silly things, which might be the tendency. 6, cross-checking information is what I would ask them to do in reliable sources. So similar to how many of us say, use Wikipedia as a first port of call, and then go double check the information, go to the references at the bottom, go to academic sources, go to places where you can have a better trust of who the author is. And then here's where you might show them an example of the AI making something up, so that they can start developing that skeptical and critical attitude toward the results, especially if it's an area that's new to them and they don't really know how to distinguish, what's true and false. And then the last one, the career competency. So if it's possible, it's nice to be able to relate it to a career. So if they're interested in pursuing any career, I might ask them about that. And then if I can, trying to relate what we're talking about and what the assignment is and what the AI tool is giving them, relating that to things that are being discussed in that industry. So for example, if I'm working with nursing students and I know they're interested in going into the healthcare profession, I might mention how AI is being used in the healthcare area, say for scanning images and detecting cancer or something like that. And then some of the pros and cons that are being discussed currently in that industry, just to give it some more relevancy to them and to show them that this isn't just for this assignment today. This is actually something that you potentially are going to be dealing with when you go into the workforce. And I think that can give it a little bit more relevancy for them, and they might care a little bit more about thinking about through the implications beyond just the assignment. Okay. So that's a framework. So if people are up for it, we can move into our brainstorming activity. So thinking about the framework, maybe just picking one or two areas. I'm either discussing it in general, what your thoughts are on it, but also I'd like to hear how you think that you could use this framework inside your classroom or inside your institution, or even for yourself to upskill yourself before you look at upskilling your students. An AI tool like ChatGPT can be a really good way to do this brainstorming as well, like asking it. And so I've come up with some questions to think about here. How can AI literacy be integrated into existing curriculum? We already have so much material to cover. Sometimes it can feel like, oh, just another thing. So what are ways that we could integrate it more smoothly into what we already have? What hands-on activities can engage student in developing AI literacy to avoid making it into something boring that they really aren't that interested in, like hands-on activities or problem-based learning kind of things could really get them to develop these skills without necessarily knowing that these are the skills that they're developing. Are there any resources or tools maybe that you've come across already or you think could help support educators in going through these concepts effectively with their students at different age groups? And then if we're thinking about evaluation, are there creative ways that we could evaluate whether students have gotten these AI literacy skills beyond the traditional assessments, which we already know have problems because they can be just so easily done with generative AI already? What are some ways you could tell whether or not somebody, is meeting these kind of milestones in terms of developing that critical awareness around AI? So feel free to type in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself. Yeah, Chris has mentioned the scaffolding. Yeah, I think for me, I need something more concrete than, oh, you have to just learn about AI. And so for me, this was a way to just put a little bit more concreteness around the concepts. And of course, they'll change over time, but at the core fundamental level, I think these are going to be what we need in the near future.
Do you find yourself going back to the same class over and over again, and kind of like, okay, last time we talked about this, here's how this would kind of map onto what we already did? Or is it kind of more of a you join the group for one session and then you kind of keep on moving on to another one?
I mean, recently I've been doing training with like more middle-aged plus folks, and I'm finding there's a lot of memory loss between we talk about it, and then the next time I see them, it's kind of mostly all gone. Like they'll retain just a little bit here and there. Oh, I remember you're supposed to do this with the prompt, but I can't really remember how we were supposed to do that. So I'm finding a lot of repetition for people that aren't following all the AI influencers online like I am, and they're not getting all that terminology and being soaked in it. It's like kind of new every time.
Do you think part of that, like in my experience, like I find that folks, like certain people, are almost afraid to like make a mistake with it. You know what I mean? And that kind of goes with any sort of like computer technology, right? They're like, I'm going to like destroy my computer if I do this wrong. So like I find like when I think about people in my parents' age and thereabouts, where they're just like really um, kind of concerned about like causing some sort of damage. And I think that's a like real like stumbling block when we talk about like building people's literacy, because if we're afraid to make a mistake, um, we're never going to be growing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I specifically said to someone, you're not going to break it. And I don't know, maybe it's not the best thing for me to have said, because they said, oh, I know. But that was still their attitude was still this. And maybe that's from a legacy from, all of us have probably had the experience of hitting the wrong button on our computer, and then, it goes blank, or you deleted a file and sort of throws your life into chaos. And it doesn't tech does not necessarily feel like a safe space to play around with if you kind of feel like you don't know what you're doing. um, but yeah, you really kind of harnessing that play element is how a lot of us are learning how to use the tools. But if you're waiting for someone to give you a very prescriptive list of things, it can be hard, because then you can't really do anything else except that one thing that you've got the list for. Marshall, did you have anything you wanted to comment on?
Um, Not at the moment. I'm testing. I'm taking the first question, how AI literacy can be integrated. I'm putting it
Okay.
into Copilot and to ChatGPT just to see the differences.
Do you have a specific age range or subject in mind?
Um,
Or are you just asking it generally?
I just asked it generally, but probably I'm thinking like our high school, like secondary students. Um, just because I think sometimes they don't grasp the ramifications of things that they may be doing, and with putting personal information into like AI and just posting stuff. So um, trying to work with them a little bit.
I think a lot of like professionals don't understand the ramifications of
Mm.
doing that too, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not just the high school students for sure. Like I know
No.
lots of people are like putting lots of sensitive information in there.
Yes. No. That is true.
Well, there's still a lot of organizations that don't have any guidelines or policies, even a year out. And so I hear anecdotally about people, yeah, dumping spreadsheets into ChatGPT, and it's no one's telling them they can't, but they have no training on that
Right.
tool or how it interacts with their institution, and it's a little scary.
That's one of my current because I work at I'm at the district. I'm a district admin, and that's one of my projects is basically coming up with policy and stuff for how we're going to use AI in our district.
Maybe I'll switch over my screen to Copilot and could put some prompts in together. Lisa's using Magic School. Very not good prompt. I think also just comparing different responses from the different tools can be a valuable exercise on its own, just to kind of, again, put some critical thinking in terms of, maybe a lot of us and students just use, say, Google and don't ever try to, look at other search engines. You kind of think that's just the authority on the subject, but by showing them different tools and the different responses, you can show that it's, no one tool is the be all end all. So asking Copilot this very generic question: how can AI literacy be integrated into existing curriculum for, say, a high school English class? And it immediately goes to thinking about contextualizing in terms of science fiction, which was great because that's exactly what I would do. And picking things that have AI already in them, like Brave New World, and then having students discuss AI. I think probably something we're already doing. Discussing biases, probably not as useful to have them write an essay about AI. Exploring AI generated poetry or prose. Yeah, this is one of the things I often show people, like have it write them a poem. A lot of people think poetry is like the hardest thing you could possibly ever write. And talking about, how playful it is and some of the things, and like, how did it learn how to write that poem? How did it know how to do the rhyming? Can be good conversation starters.
It's also fun to pick it apart too, right? Like when they're like, they do the limerick and it's got 5 lines and the last one doesn't rhyme, or like it's fun when it breaks, when it can't figure out exactly, how to do what you're asking it to do.
Yeah, I've heard it's bad at iambic pentameter. So Lisa has put some really great things in the chat for a bunch of different subjects, like using it in math curriculum, exploring how AI is used in data analysis. So there's so much data out there. You can even have them create dummy data if you don't want to actually use real data, and have the students start playing around with the models, with algorithms, data analysis, science, how AI is used in things like genetics and healthcare. Yeah, I think the healthcare one is fairly relevant across, regardless of what they're studying. We'll probably all interact with the healthcare system in some way. I know there was a really good thought provoker question on LinkedIn recently about would you choose a human doctor or an AI doctor? And the odds of the human doctor's odds of having a successful diagnosis were 95%, and the AI doctor was 98%. There was a lot of people still choosing human doctor, and it's just a really great prompt topic to start thinking about. Well, why are you choosing a human doctor when the human doctor has worse odds of giving you a correct diagnosis? And there's just something about, well, I want the human involved somehow. They just didn't trust the AI doctor. And a lot of people were saying, well, we really need the human doctor and the AI doctor to work together is probably the best scenario, but that wasn't part of the thought experiment. Social studies, discussing impact of AI in society, analyzing case studies. Yeah, current events. I mean, things are happening so fast. There's so many current events that you could bring in for AI literacy. I think that's a great way to do it. As long as you have time to keep up on all the all the current events, which every single day are changing. job automation is a huge concern. And I think young people are aware of the risk as well. Did you want to jump in, Lisa?
I'm trying to unmute. Sorry, I
Oh,
had students taking in-class makeup behind me, so I had been off camera
okay.
for a little bit. But I think it's interesting too how we can teach them to kind of think about prompt engineering and kind of structuring and AI literacy, even like without having to be like super overt. So like having kids look at a poem and analyze metaphors and similes by separating out vehicles and tenors and then making images of them, right? And thinking about ways to use it. And they're developing literacy skills, even if they're not overtly developing literacy skills. Or like it's like something I'm doing, but I'm also still in my content as well, which I think is really an interesting way to kind of play and get them thinking. And then they're all using different image generators. So which one do they like better and why? And what prompt worked better here to get what I wanted? And why can't it do this? And kind of really kind of having a meta discussion of the product they've created for the activity within the discipline, which I think is really interesting to do.
Yeah, I think the embedding has always been the challenge. Like I know with digital literacy, and these are older surveys, but when they would survey students about, how do you want to learn about technology and digital things, they tend to just say, I want to learn about it embedded in a subject. I don't want a standalone computer class or a standalone digital technologies class. And I think that was kind of sobering to see that, because I was seeing a lot of that kind of divorce between, well, you learn about the tech over here in this area of education, but everything else is, pure subject. And they were saying, no, bring it into the context, because if it's contextual, we'll be more interested in it, right? And I think that's like what you were talking about in your session, is if you can make it relevant to them and their context, suddenly they're paying more attention, because it has applicability.
I think it makes it more fun for them too, right? Like they're more engaged in kind of thinking through not just the tech, but also whatever the subject is, when they can kind of see the relevancy and the bigger picture and where it would fit in to their lives beyond that particular subject in that particular classroom.
Does anyone have any thoughts about creative ways to evaluate AI literacy? So how do you know that students have actually started getting these skills?
That's a pretty tough question, actually. Like, in terms of, like, I can think of like individual like activities for different components of it. Like, how good are they at detecting whether an image is AI generated, right? But like as an overall sort of holistic, this student is AI literate, I think that's a very difficult question.
Yeah, but part of my concern is that we haven't done a good job in the digital literacy space of being able to check whether people are digitally literate. And I know this extends beyond, young people in school all the way up to my peers and older, where never really got any sort of formal training and have sort of just been stumbling along. And at a certain point, it kind of starts showing, when you start having these large gaps in your knowledge that previously were maybe a little bit easier to hide. I'm just wondering if in the world of AI, it's gonna be that greater digital divide between people who oh, I can, I'll type out this prompt and I'll get this, and it takes them 5 seconds, versus people that don't know how to do that and kind of are just spending an hour sort of sitting at their screen trying to stumble through prompting, and I just would really like to avoid that scenario happening again with all these applications. Even just things like Microsoft Word, people take for granted that everybody knows how to use Word and knows all the features, and I'm always finding that's not the case. But no one ever evaluated them. It's just sort of assumed that you would just pick up how to use Word for some reason. That's one of the things that I'm really interested in, us not making that mistake and just assuming that because you use a computer or you use a phone, that it's just very intuitive and you'll just pick up all these skills, because that's just not true. And we don't expect that in other areas of life, like, oh, just get into a car, you'll know exactly what to do because it's just hitting buttons. Well, yeah, yeah, that's sort of true on some level, but pretty dangerous if we let people do that.
When I think if we, going back to kind of the embedded discussion, we can't just like have like a standalone credential or degree or something that has like a more traditional test on the back end that then you have to go, like we have to almost learn it in a context, right? With a purpose that's like relevant and meaningful, to be able to like then demonstrate that we learned it. And so that I think is where I get stuck. I asked Raina what are some creative assessment ideas because she gave me all the traditional ones like multiple choice tests, and I was like, that's dumb. But she had an AI showcase, which might be interesting to kind of see, a debate where kids can use like debate skills to talk about concepts, having them create like language learning skills or exercises, or use AI to try to solve like a real world problem. And those sounded a lot more interesting. But again, it has to be like relevant and like in the task. It can't just be AI for AI, which
Yeah,
is the
I think
challenge.
problem-based learning is kind of coming back to that, but it's harder to do that. It's a lot easier to assign an essay that everyone writes, the same word count, the same font. Yeah. Let's see what's Copilot. Yeah, I've heard a lot about authentic assessment coming out, but again, these things tend to be a lot more labor intensive for teachers than our traditional assessments. Yeah. Has anyone found any, I know you talked about these in your session, Lisa, any resources or tools that they like are particularly effective in getting students to engage with learning about all this stuff?
I like giving them like a prompt engineering framework and an evaluation output framework, or to a framework for evaluating an output, and then asking them to use it on an assignment and like differentiate what was theirs and what was AI, and talk about why they made the choices they did. So there's like, I'm really assessing kind of their use of AI more than the content, because at this point, knowledge is fairly cheap, in terms of like, the stuff I can Google or that can be found in all of the training data. So I think that tends to be helpful. And then it's a lot of formative and anecdotal and walking around my room while they're trying to generate images and talking to them about, well, what prompt did you use? Why did you use that? What if you changed that word? What do you think this word produced? You know, how can you do this? And just letting and encouraging them to play and kind of be curious and then having those conversations. But other than like prep and edit, which are my favorite prompt engineering and evaluation frameworks, that can be, you know, it's hard to find like a codified thing that works consistently all the time. I do like Sidekick a lot though. That's fun from School AI.
Hmm. What are people's thoughts about disclosing, having students disclose whether they used AI? I think it's too early days to make a call on that one.
If you'd asked me at the start of the session, I would have said definitely. But you said something about like, you know, some people would just see it as another tool that they use, and I'm thinking we wouldn't ask students to disclose they used a calculator. Um, I don't know. Like
Yeah,
I
it's different than a calculator though.
no,
It's
for sure.
like,
Yeah, that's
like,
true. I still definitely am on the side of they should be disclosing. But I hadn't really thought of it, you know, like I hadn't considered that other perspective that like the other tools get used. Like we, you know, Google Read and Write, for example, no student uses I use predictive text on this assignment, right? So, but yeah, I still default to the position that people should be like saying they used it.
do you then do you practice that yourself then? Like, I don't know, if you generate stuff for
I
LinkedIn
am
or other places?
a giant hypocrite, and so
Okay, okay, yeah.
no, no, I mean like, so my role, like we like I'm sort of centrally assigned to the board office. I go out to different schools and stuff like that, and so to be honest, I use it mainly for showing people how it's used. I don't use it a lot personally. I do use like the image generation a lot. Like for example, if I'm using if I'm creating a slide deck and I want like clip art of something, I will use like the Dolly through Bing to do that. But I don't anything where it's like kind of like high stakes. I don't dabble with it. I'm taking like an additional qualification course right now. I'm not even touching it, even though even though like my whole project on it is like related to AI. So I I don't know. I try to avoid it, not out of fear, but just because I'm very much a rule follower.
Yeah, that's how a lot of well, myself included, writer friends, nonfiction writing, a lot of hesitation with using it, just not necessarily out of fear, but just worrying about losing the human and losing what's special about creative human output and giving over to the machine. And I think that's a hesitancy like Lisa was talking about in her session. And I think like I would like to be part of helping people become aware of how they can use it without losing the human, you know, by keeping the human at the center, keeping the human involved, keeping the human evaluating and being critical about it, but using it to help us, not to take away what we find enjoyable about what we do. So Sky commented about, yeah, freshman research papers and citing it. Yeah, have I have sort of mixed feelings about citing it as a source, because I worry that we're then kind of teaching them that it's just like another source, but it's not really a source. It's generating it uniquely each time. And the lack of traceability is a big issue really with any AI models, is they're just guessing what they they think the next word is. They're not
Well,
actually going and checking.
Some of the things that I've read are about how they should use it for more of pre-planning and research, and then cite kind of like what input they put in. So whatever model they're using, they'd screenshot what they input and then put in the question, kind of as an appendix in their paper to say, you know, this is what I asked and this is the response that I got. In their pre-planning for doing research, so that we know as educators what they were looking at as they were doing the research for their papers, so that when they write their papers, we're not looking at specifically AI generated content, but more of that brainstorming and that research kind of effort of, this is kind of where I got ideas, and now this is where I went from there, so that we can kind of see that differentiation from them. And then we have that log to say, okay, this is what you got from AI. I can see how that's different than what you put in your paper. So that way we have that differentiation from that pre-planning and those ideas versus what they're actually giving us. And then we also have that log from them so we can specifically see exactly what it said. And so I kind of liked that idea of being able to show them how they can use that in generating ideas instead of content, and then proving to them too, just because AI has such a tendency to hallucinate, that they have to then go back and look and make sure that those sources are accurate and the information that they're getting is true, and that they can't just take that at face value. So I think that could be interesting to be able to work with and teach them to do.
Yeah, totally. I think that's using it as a way to make transparent their process. And I know we talked about, we don't ask them to cite maybe Google. Just because we haven't in the past, I'm not convinced that we shouldn't be asking them to be more transparent about where they did their research, you know, what sites they visited. Because I know in terms of like my own experience and other students, we sort of were told not to use websites because those were frowned upon by, you know, MLA and APA and even our teachers. And so you would go out, look online for something, and then you would just go try to find a source. There wasn't the actual source that you used. It was just one that looked nicer for your teacher. And I think that kind of, I saw that fostered a sort of duplicitousness among students where they were using Google, you know, 99% of the time, and then they would just go find some source that seemed like it said something similar and then just put that in their paper as a reference. And it kind of like, you know, fooled the teacher into thinking that they had actually gone and looked up the sources, but they were just using Google. And so, you know, in the spirit of Wikipedia, which is very transparent, you know, every edit is tracked, all the history is there. Maybe we should be encouraging, like you said, Sky, to show us your research process from A to Z, you know, and where you use which tool along the way, not necessarily to police their use of the tool, but to kind of be able to guide them and say, I saw here that you use this AI tool and it sort of led you astray. You know, maybe next time you could try using this other one that's maybe better, or, you know, changing your research pathway and looking up information. It's a struggle though, because Google just made it so easy to, you know, quickly find information. You don't even have to go to websites now. They just have info boxes that tell you the thing. So how are you supposed to cite that? You know, you don't. You think, oh, it's just common knowledge, right? But it's really not. So, formative feedback. Yeah, I think that I'm getting a lot of signals from the AI educators I follow that we need to shift more to looking at the process, not necessarily the end product, because we know now the end product can be done with Gen AI really quickly. So can we look more at the process? But of course, again, we get back to the issue of it's more labor intensive to look at the process and to look at drafts along the way, to ask them to show all those things, to look at all those things. Like even if you ask them to give you their prompts or their ChatGPT links, you know, we all know we don't have time to go actually look at all those things.
Yeah, like although I do like that it kind of forces their hand a bit, right? Like in our board, we've been kind of like advocating the conversations, observations, process work for a while, and like now that generative AI is here, people are scrambling, trying to like, how do I defeat this, right? And it's kind of like, well, like this is guess what? We don't actually have to change our message at all, because we're kind of recommending you continue doing what we have been recommending anyway, right? So, but you're right, it is labor intensive. The other thing too is, like, as you offer students like different opportunities for to create different products, right? If you work on your rubric or your scoring mechanism, like, it shouldn't be too difficult to create a scoring instrument that can accommodate, somebody does a video, somebody does a presentation, somebody does an essay, like like the whole UDL piece, right?
Yeah, move to more multimodal. Yeah,
When I think, Chris, it focuses us really clearly on what exactly we're assessing on any given thing, right? Like when I talk to my students about whether they can use generative AI for something, and I'm like, well, I'm not evaluating your artistic skills. Like I'm not evaluating painting and drawing. I'm evaluating, can you envision this simile and see it visually? And so if you want to draw that because drawing is your jam, like go. But if you want to use a generative AI model, as long as the image that you got, you can justify as like representing this thing I'm asking you to unpack, that's what I'm looking at. And so the generative AI there for me is not like a concern. But if I'm evaluating whether you can really craft a thesis or an argument that's independent creative thought, then I do care whether that's more you than AI, right? Or totally you and not AI at all, right? So I think it's forcing teachers into that conversation around what is it I'm assessing? What am I actually wanting to give the students feedback on so that I can focus on that? And then I don't have to, like, I think about English teachers, we had like how many rubric categories, and it's so huge for one essay. And I'm like, well, what did we teach them in this unit? Like, what were we focused on in this unit? Like, I can't give feedback on 10 essay categories, but like, if on this one I'm looking at thesis, then that's what I give them feedback on, right? And so I think that's where the process can also be something we focus on in a little bit more of a bite-sized assessment so that it's not quite so comprehensive all the time. And that gives them some flexibility around using AI when it's not the thing that's being assessed necessarily.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And possibly, like, looking at my framework is, oh, there's so many things, right? And there are so many things with AI, but maybe picking, like, we're going to look at safety this semester, or we're going to look at safety this week, and picking something to, wrap around this unit is maybe make it a little bit more digestible. And sometimes there's crossover and overlap, of course, but just not trying to do all the things all the time, because it can definitely be overwhelming. We're about at time, so I just want to thank everyone for coming. I'm looking forward to building on this AI literacy framework and maybe making some more resources that were related to it. And when I posted on LinkedIn a while back, I got a lot of good feedback about ways to maybe emphasize ethics more and maybe reword some things. So if you want to follow my work on this, you can follow me on LinkedIn or my website, kennedyhq.com. That's a cool AI generated image. I use AI image generators for all my presentations now because it's so much easier than trying to find stock photos that match what I'm trying to say. If you want to give feedback for SequoiaCon, this is the bit.ly link. I'm happy to take your feedback, and if you're watching this later, also feel free to, and let us know like how you think we could use the literacy framework and what other kinds of things we could use to just really make this more concrete for teachers and educators, because it's just changing all the time and it's hard to know kind of how to keep up. But I think for me, having a little bit of structure, because it's kind of like a rubric or something, like, okay, yeah, I've done this, like gives me a little bit less overwhelm. when I'm looking at how do we teach these skills. So yeah.
Thanks so much. That was awesome.
All right, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.